guys, welcome back to 75Dually Garage. Today we're going to continue with part 2 of the Cummins swap, so stay tuned. In part 2 I'm going to cover 3 different areas. We're going to briefly look at the brakes and what options you have there. We're also going to look at the alternator and how you can potentially hook it up. Then we're going to look at transmission types, and there's a lot of different transmission types that you can use with your Cummins swap. One of the questions you'll need to ask yourself is, what brake system is better? And the truth is, the one that came with the vehicle. Both systems work great, okay? Both of these Hydro Boost and the Vacuum Boost systems have been around for decades, okay? So don't really worry whether it has vacuum or Hydro Boost. I've seen both in dualies, okay? I've seen them in 1 ton and 3/4 ton applications. They both work excellent. Don't worry about that. What you need to worry about is if you have the systems to deal with either the vacuum or the Hydro Boost, okay? What I've got here in my hands is something you guys have probably seen for decades. It's a vacuum brake booster, right? And these work perfectly fine in these 1 tons. They've been around for decades. They're really good. The issue becomes when you swap in a Cummins that you're going to need a vacuum source, and diesels don't produce vacuum. You actually have to have a vacuum pump, and I'll show that to you here in just a second, to run one of these. But if you do have this system and you get a vacuum pump with your swap, you can certainly run one of these if that's what you have as an existing system. Alright, let's get our handy dandy GoPro working here again. And what you see right in front of you is the vacuum pump. So what this does is this actually makes vacuum for your brake systems and other needs that you have. And there's the vacuum port that comes off of this. Now I have mine capped off. I do not need it. And I'll show you here in a second why. But that will be your vacuum source if you want to run one of those vacuum boosters. So as I just showed you, the vacuum pump sits right in front of the power steering pump, and we're going to need a power steering pump if we run a Hydro Boost. And let's look at that system. On the back side of the power steering pump are the standard 2 lines, the high pressure and the low pressure return. We need those for not only the power steering function, but for running the Hydro Boost. Okay, if you did not have Hydro Boost with your truck to start with, you're going to need to tee in or tie into the power steering lines. What you're seeing right there is a brass fitting that allowed us to put the fluid back into the power steering pump from the Hydro Boost. This is the brake setup I have on the 75Dually. It's a Hydro Boost unit. In the back, in the Hydro Boost unit itself, it actually has, let's see if I can get this in the camera, it actually has 3 hoses coming and going out of the Hydro Boost. There is a high pressure side that you take off of the power steering pump and you plumb it into those 2 silver lines that you see. And there is a return line which goes to that brass tee that I showed you earlier. Let's move on to the alternator. This is one portion of the project that really kind of drove me crazy. There isn't a lot of information out there on how to convert a Dodge alternator over to a Chevy system. I'm going to share with you as much as I have and what I learned, and I hope that this helps you in your swap when you come to this point. First of all, what's the difference between the 2 systems? They're really not actually that much different between the 2. The standard Chevy system for these square bodies is a 1-wire system, okay? You've got 1 main wire going to the alternator, okay? And then the alternator is grounded. On the Dodge system, you have a couple more wires, and it's just a matter of dealing with the voltage regulator. The voltage regulator on a Chevy system is internal, thus why you only need 1 wire. On the Dodge alternator, it is an external regulator, okay? So I'm going to show you how I dealt with that. Here's the alternator that we've been talking about. And here is the external voltage regulator. Probably the best thing I'm going to do for you is put up on the screen the diagram that I found online, and it really helps best describe how to hook this up. As you can see on the diagram, there's a blue wire coming from a 12-volt switch source. Generally, that is your ignition switch. That energizes the voltage regulator. Then you have a red wire that comes from the positive on your battery directly to the alternator. From there, you see the two blue and green wires that are coming off the voltage regulator and going to the alternator. Now, when I pulled apart the Dodge alternator, I pulled off its little wiring harness, and below that there were two posts. From those two posts, if I remember it correctly, one was blue. There was a blue wire you could see going to the inside of the alternator, and there was a green wire that was going to the inside of the alternator. But don't take that as gospel. There is a possibility that you're going to have to do some research on which wire or which stud is which. So make sure you confirm that before you do this and fully hook it up. We are very fortunate to have a variety of transmissions that we can use behind a Cummins engine. You can use automatics, you can use manuals. You have a great deal of variety of transmission type that you can use behind this. If you go the automatic route, you can use Allison's, which actually ends up being very large, and you have to modify your tunnel from what I understand, but they're very, very good transmissions. As well as the Dodge line of transmissions that have been used for decades. There are a bunch of different types of transmissions when you get into the Dodge. The particular transmission that I have behind this truck is an A518. It is an overdrive torque flight transmission. Then you move into the RE and RH family of transmissions. They are essentially overdrives, and they are electronically controlled depending on the model and year that you're talking about. So it's really good to do a lot of research into this before you start. What transmission are you going to be running? Is it the one that came with the engine, or are you going to purchase one outside? If so, then you are going to have to consider the transmission mounts and also the electronics and the electrical that are going to be driving that particular transmission and making it work properly in your truck. I made a switch plate to run a couple of the systems in my pickup. The first one you'll see there says OD, and that actually switches on and off the overdrive for the transmission. The next one you see there that says timing actually turns on and off the timing mechanism on the VE pump. Beside it is the switch for the radiator fans, and the fourth one there is for the transmission cooler. I have a fan on that cooler. On the OD switch that I just showed you on my switch panel, this particular transmission has an overdrive system in it that needs to be turned on and off through a solenoid. So there's a 2-pin setup on the transmission case that turns the overdrive on and off. I use that system, that switch, because in the 91 Dodge that I pulled this out of, that system was turned on and off automatically by the ECU. I'm not running that Dodge ECU, and nor do you have to. It's just one more piece of complicated equipment that you really don't necessarily have to have. One of the next pieces of the puzzle that you'll need to consider once you've chosen the transmission that you're going to use is the drive shaft. Now, I have the 2-piece drive shaft that came with this truck originally. You have to modify and get a different yoke installed in order to utilize a Dodge transmission in this particular setup. There are different yokes, they're for the different years, so go to your driveline shop. Highly recommended, go to your driveline shop and consult those guys. They know what they're doing. They've probably been doing it for years and years. So that's something else you're going to need to consider when doing one of these swaps. One thing I'd like to suggest to you guys is make a list. Before you even start a complicated swap like this, make a list of what you're going to need, what kind of transmission you're going to put in it, on and on and on. Make a list up. It does not have to be real fancy. I got kind of fancy with this because I made an Excel file. And it was for me to keep track of the project. I also put a cost column in there so that I could keep track of the dollars. How much did this thing really, cost me to do? But you can take out the old paper and pencil and do it that way. But I do suggest before you start one of these that you start a list. Thanks for watching 75Dually Garage. I really appreciate your time. Do me a favor, give me a like, and if you have not seen my channel previously, do me a favor. Click the subscribe button, and right next to it is that little bell. That'll let you and get you notification on the next video in the series. Thanks again for your time, and thanks for watching 75Dually Garage.